Ezekiel's mouth has been opened. He's transitioned from being a prophet of judgment now to a prophet of hope. And just like in his restoration sections, there were embedded little oracles of hope in chapter 11 and chapter 28. So in his restoration section of 34 to 48, these oracles will spring out of moments of judgment, which will pave the way for the coming kingdom of God. Now, do you remember the pattern that we observed in chapter 25? Because, therefore, then you will know. We see that same pattern, that same kind of pattern that was used in judgment oracles in chapters 34 to 36. Look at this. All right, see this? We're in chapter 34. Because, therefore, then you will know. Because, therefore, this pattern is going to recur even in these restoration passages. And there's another thing that holds these chapters together, 34 to 36. In 34:1, Yahweh says to Ezekiel, "Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel." And then in 35:1, "Son of man, prophesy against the mountains of Seir." He's talking about Edom here. You see, God, he's got to clean house a little bit before he's ready to set up his new house, if you know what I mean. But if God is against the wicked, that means he is for the righteous. In 36:1, it says, "Son of man, prophesy to the mountains of Israel. I am for you," Yahweh says. Now, what does it mean for Yahweh to be for the mountains of Israel? Well, that means he will shower his blessings on those mountains. Look at this in chapter 36. Chapter 36, 8, 9. "You, O mountains of Israel, will shoot forth from branches, and you'll yield fruit. Your land will be tilled, and it will be sown. I will multiply on you, man and beast. You shall be fruitful and multiply." That sounds like Genesis to me. "I will cause you to be inhabited like former times, and I will do more good to you than I have ever done before." Don't you love that? Well, what about the shepherds, right? He's against the bad shepherds, and you know what? He is going to become the good shepherd. So what did the bad shepherds do wrong? Look what they neglected to do, what they should have done. The shepherds of Israel, those kings of Judah. Back up to chapter 34. This is Messiah stuff here, you guys. This is good. Verse 4, "The weak you have not strengthened." You see, they should have healed the sick. They should have bound up the injured. They should have brought back the strayed and sought after the lost. That sounds like Jesus to me. But they didn't, and therefore the sheep were scattered. Who's going to rescue them? Who's going to bring these sheep back? Look at verse 15. I love these "I myself" statements. "I myself will be shepherd of the sheep, and I myself will gather them and bring them back from the countries where they have been scattered." Now, we know from John chapter 10, we know that Jesus is the good shepherd, right? But we also know that from Ezekiel 34, because almost in the same breath, in verse 22, it says that Yahweh is the shepherd of his people. And then in verse 23, it says that David, the son of David, will be shepherd for the sheep. Sounds to me like that son of David is Yahweh himself. Now, got a question for you. What is the phrase that Ezekiel will repeat 70 times in his book? You should know it by now. "Then you will know that I am the Lord." This is a statement directed both at the nations and at Israel, and it is about the honor and the glory and the reputation of Yahweh himself. And it undergirds Ezekiel's amazing oracle of giving Israel and Judah They're covenant partners of God, a new heart and a new spirit. It is the glory and reputation of Yahweh which undergirds this prophecy. Let me make that case for you in chapter 36. Let's start in verse 17. So why will Yahweh, give Israel a new heart? Let me show you. You see, Son of Man is going to repeat the sinful history of the house of Israel. It's a rebellious house, remember? They defiled the land by their ways. Therefore, because they defiled the land, I scattered them among the nations. But you know what happened when they got to those nations? When Israel was hauled off to Assyria and Judah went off to Babylon, when they came to those nations, wherever they came, they profaned my name. But I had great concern for my name, a name which is profaned among the nations. So what is Yahweh going to do about it? Well, therefore, thus says the Lord your God, it is not for your sake. No. It's not for your sake, Israel, that I am about to act, but for the sake of my name, which you profaned among the nations. I will vindicate the holiness of my name when I act. What's he going to do? How is he going to act so that the nations will know that he is Yahweh? Well, he will vindicate his holiness by doing this, by gathering Israel from the countries and bringing them to their own land, by sprinkling clean water on them, and by giving Israel a new heart and a new spirit, removing their heart of stone and giving them a heart of flesh and causing them to walk in their statutes. All of these prophecies are not for Israel's sake, but is for the sake of the holiness and the reputation of God's name. I mean, isn't that amazing? Isn't it phenomenal? Don't you love these prophecies? They're so amazing that they require nothing short of a miracle so miraculous, like, oh, I don't know, dead, dry bones coming back to life. Well, there you go. What a contrived transition into Ezekiel chapter 37. And this is Ezekiel's third visionary experience. We had one in chapters 1 to 3, vision number 2 in 8 to 10. Now, vision number 3 in chapter 37, where the hand of the Lord was on Ezekiel, and he's taken to a valley full of dry and dead bones. And he's told, Ezekiel, son of man, prophesy over those bones and prophesy to the breath. For my breath, the breath of Yahweh, will enter into them. This is like an act of new creation. I mean, think about how Adam was made in Genesis 2. God breathed life into them. And it is that same kind of new creation moment described here in Ezekiel 37. Now, we're told chapter 37 tells us what this vision means. Let's look at verse 11. What does this amazing vision mean? Son of man, these bones, they are the whole house of Israel. I think whole house is referring to Israel and Judah. They said, hey, our hope is lost. We're cut off. We're scattered among the nations. Well, does this prophecy refer to, new birth, to like regeneration, like that which is described in John chapter 3? I'm sure it includes those elements, but it is not about spiritual new birth primarily. It is about national restoration. Look at this. Thus says the Lord, I will open your graves, I will raise you from your graves, and I will bring you back to the land. When I open your graves and raise you from your graves and place you in your land, O Israel and Judah. Well, then in the second half of chapter 37, Ezekiel is going to perform his last sign act of the whole book. He's going to get 2 sticks, stick number 1 and stick number 2. And he's going to write on one stick, Israel, and on the other stick, Judah. And then he is going to, I know you see what's coming, he's going to join those 2 sticks together into one stick. You will no longer be 2 nations, Yahweh said, but no, you will be one nation in the land, and I will set one king over you. You will no longer be two nations, and there will no longer be division between you, but rather you will be one nation. And then look how this prophecy of chapter 37, look how it ends. This is important. The last few verses here of the stick of Israel and Judah. I will make a covenant of peace with them, and I will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. My dwelling place will be with them when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. My sanctuary, my dwelling place. Well, I mean, wouldn't it make perfect sense to go from there, God setting his sanctuary in the midst of his restored nation forever, to jump from this right into chapter 40, the new temple? Wouldn't that be a logical transition? Well, God has a little bit of business to take care of first. And welcome to the Gog oracles, Ezekiel 38 and 39. God has dealt with the evil inside of his covenant people. He's given them a new heart. Now, how is he going to deal with the evil that's still out in the world, the evil among the nations? Well, let's just walk through this oracle together, and then we'll try to figure out, what does it mean? Well, in the latter years, at the end of the ages, this is set in the far eschatological future, when Israel has already been regathered and she is dwelling in peace, then God will draw Gog from the uttermost parts of the north. He and his 7 allies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and he will devise a wicked scheme, and he will come against a city that does not have walls, a city that is at peace, thinking that I will destroy it and I will take this prosperous nation. But then, before he even gets a chance to swing his weapon, God will rain fire down upon him, and there will be an earthquake which will swallow up his armies, and he will lie dead on the ground, and birds, that's my little bird, birds will eat the flesh of his armies, and Israel will be burning the weapons of their army for 7 years, and it will be burying their dead for 7 months, and then all the nations of the world will witness this judgment against Gog, and Yahweh will vindicate his name before all nations. What do we make of that? I mean, that's some wild stuff right there. Well, it's becoming increasingly popular to suppose that this is referring to not a specific enemy or people, but rather to kind of all of the general evil in the world that is opposed to God and opposed to his people at all times, at all places. But it will be stopped at the end of time before God starts his new creation. That's kind of the popular symbolic interpretation of these chapters. But my problem with that is that the Bible has so much to say about this final battle between Israel and this conglomeration of all the nations. I mean, it's in Isaiah 23 and Jeremiah 30 and Daniel 12 and Joel 2 and Micah 4 and Zephaniah 3 and Zechariah 14. Check that one out. That one's very definite. So, I mean, my question is, why would you spiritualize something that we have so much biblical data for? Anyways, that's just my take. Well, for those who take this Gog oracle literally, our next question is, does it occur before the millennium or after the millennium? If you believe there's going to be a 1,000-year reign of Christ on the earth. Well, let's just assume that there is for the sake of argument. The strongest arguments that this grand battle will take place before the millennium are, one, it's placed before the temple. I'll let you think about that one a little bit. Why would we need a battle before the temple, assuming that this is a chronological progression? And two, there's this curious 7-year burning of the weapons. I mean, does it really make sense for us to have a millennium and then 7 years after the millennium, before the new creation? That's kind of curious, isn't it? Well, there are a couple of good arguments that this Gog battle will take place after the millennium. And for that, we have to go to the book of Revelation. All right, the book of Revelation. Of course, we're going to chapter 20. We got the millennium here in the first 6 verses. And then, when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released, and he will deceive all the nations from the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and gather them for battle. So here we have, a Gog and Magog battle, which seems to take place after the millennium. Maybe there's 2 Gog battles. There's a lot of people who propose that. But then I think even stronger, back in Ezekiel 38, this prophecy against Gog. Who is Gog attacking? Well, it says that he goes against a land that is restored from war, a people who are gathered from many peoples, who now dwell securely. I mean, would that really, how can that possibly be said of an Israel during the tribulation? I mean, I, I, I don't see how that works. And therefore, I lean towards the um, after the millennium position on this, but that's just me. Okay, you know what that means? We've arrived at the final chapters of the book of Ezekiel, 40 to 48. Oh my gosh. All right, so what is the main plot tension in the whole book of Ezekiel? I'll give you a hint. It's in chapters 8 to 11. The presence of God has left his sanctuary. But in chapter 43, he's coming back. Let's look at that chart again that we looked at earlier. All right, where are you, chart? Here we go. The glory of God departs from, but then returns to the temple. The glory leaves, but then in chapter 43, he led me to the gate that's facing east, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the east. That's where he left from. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters, and he entered the temple facing east, and the glory of God filled the temple. I mean, it's amazing. Now, that is the main point. That's the main point of this section. The glory of God returning to the temple, dwelling again with his people. I won't argue with that. But if the only purpose of this entire section is that God is going to live with his people forever, why do we have 9 chapters of precise, meticulous, carefully crafted detail in these chapters? I mean, take a look at this. Let's go now to chapter 40 of Ezekiel. We'll look at this chart later. 40. So we have, of course, the hand of the Lord was upon me. Let's make that gray. Why not? That's better. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me in visions to the land of Israel on a very high mountain. And we have a tour guide here, and we're going to be given a tour of the whole temple. Chapters 40, 41, and 42, detailed description of this structure, the surrounding buildings, just everything. I believe this picture was created by Daniel Block. I've stolen lots of wonderful diagrams because lots of diagrams exist of this temple. And we see this is the path that Ezekiel took through the temple. He entered through the east gate and then looked at the north gate and the south gate, and then went through the south gate into the inner court here and looked at the other gates. And then he entered into the temple itself, and then he kind of continued his tour from there. We're given precise detail on the vestibule, the nave, the Holy of Holies, the surrounding side chambers, all this wonderful detail. There's some great videos, actually. Someone's rendered all of these and have put together a fantastic video, which you can find online. Again, all of this detail, and here is the altar as well. Well, let me give you an overview kind of all of these chapters, just so you can see their structure at a glance. And yes, that is what this chart is. We just kind of skimmed very briefly through chapters 40 to 42, all of the schematics and the design of that temple and the space. And then the first half of chapter 43, God's glory returns to that space. And then there's this additional detail about the altar in the inner court, I believe. And then we kind of see it seems to be a bit of a parallel going on here with a description of the allotment of the land in chapter 48, and then the river of God flowing from the temple in chapter 47. And then there's a description of the kitchen, which almost seems to match this altar, because at the center we have the responsibilities of the priests and the prince. Now, I want to kind of touch down at a couple points here, starting with this wonderful river in chapter 47. Look at this neat river. There was water issuing from below the threshold of the temple. We have water coming out of the temple itself, and it's flowing, it's moving. This water is going towards the east. And it's going to, leave the temple structure, and it's going to get bigger. It's going to become ankle deep, then knee deep, then waist deep, and then so deep you can't even walk through it. You can barely swim, and it's going to go out from the temple area, and it's going to go to the east. And wherever it goes, everything becomes fresh and alive. Even the Dead Sea, it passes right into the Dead Sea, full of salt and nastiness. Nothing can grow there until the river of God flows into the Dead Sea and brings that which was dead back to life. Well, we are given other little snapshots of this same river in some of the other prophets. In Joel 3, it says that a fountain shall come from the house of the Lord. Pretty neat. Zechariah 14, verse 8, it says that on that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem. Half are going to go east, that is to the Dead Sea, and half are going to go west, that is to the Mediterranean. Well, take a look at a couple of pictures that an artist put together of what this might look like. I know it's a little bit cheesy, but it's beautiful at the same time. So here is the temple structure, and there's the river flowing out of the east gate. This, of course, is facing north. This is facing west towards the Mediterranean out there. And then we're told, Ezekiel chapter 40, that it's on a high mountain. So that's where, the light of the temple radiates from. You can look at Isaiah 60 to get an idea of the fact that there's going to be light above the temple. Again, a very high mountain. That's probably the Dead Sea, because you can see mountains on the other side. And then it's going to flow also to the Mediterranean Sea as well. Well, let's consider the priests and the prince described in chapters 44 to 46. Well, this prince, he's most likely the same prince and shepherd of the people from chapter 34. So we're probably talking about Messiah here. But we can't forget about those troublesome priests. The priests who administer literal animal blood sacrifices in this temple. I know what you're thinking. You're probably saying, okay, David, hold on. You have gone too far. Sacrifices? Are you kidding me? I mean, haven't you read the book of Hebrews? The once and for all sacrifice of Jesus has put an end to all the old covenant sacrifices, the blood of bulls and goats. Besides, Jesus is the true temple. Doesn't he make that claim in John chapter 2? And we ourselves as the church, we are the temple as the body of Christ. And I seem to remember something from the book of Revelation saying that in the New Jerusalem there will be no temple. I mean, why don't you just tell us that it's all symbolic and we can move on with our lives? I'm sure a lot of people think that right now. And you know what? You present a pretty strong case, my friend. But for the sake of argument, let's suppose that there will be a future millennium, and that this will be a time during which God will fulfill all of his promises to Israel. Well, what if this future period, will be far more Jewish than we have been led to believe? What if this period is going to present Israel as she has always been intended to be, something that was prophesied but never realized? I mean, it says in Zechariah 14 that all nations will come up to the house of God to celebrate the Feast of Booths. And in Isaiah 56, it says that my house will be a house of prayer for all nations, and that those nations will keep the Sabbath. Well, that's kind of interesting. And then, of course, we can't forget about that pesky chapter, Jeremiah 33. Look at this. I'm sure you remember this curious chapter. Jeremiah 33. Is it 17? Yes. For thus says the Lord, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of Israel, and the Levitical priests will never lack a man in my presence to burn offerings and to make sacrifices forever. I mean, what are you going to do with that? This is, the same context as the new covenant. Well, how do we understand sacrifices? You see, the purpose of sacrifices in the Old Testament, let's go back to Leviticus here. The purpose of those sacrifices was never to achieve our salvation. Yes, Hebrew makes that point very clear. Rather, the purpose of those sacrifices was to enable the worshiper to draw near to Yahweh. Because wherever Yahweh is, that is sacred space. That is holy ground. Think about Exodus chapter 3 with Moses. Kick off your sandals. This is holy ground. When I enter into that space, and I got sandals on my feet, I risk contaminating that holy space, making it so it's no longer holy. The sacrifices of the Old Testament, what they did, their purpose was to decontaminate that sacred space, was to cleanse it, was to clean it, so that Yahweh can continue to dwell in the presence of his people, in the middle of their camp. Now, this process would not be necessary for those who have resurrection bodies. They're never going to be unclean, either morally or physically. But, I mean, again, let's put on our hypothetical hat here. Imagine a millennium in which there are both unglorified and glorified people living side by side. Those unglorified people, they're going to want to worship Yahweh too, and they're going to want to go to the temple. And when they do, they risk contaminating the new temple. Therefore, we need a mechanism to cleanse and to decontaminate the new temple structure. And I think that's possibly what these sacrifices are for. In addition to just being done ritually and out of remembrance of the great sacrifice of Jesus. Well, if none of that makes any sense to you and your heads are spinning, consider at least the stated purpose for all of these 9 chapters. It occurs in chapter 40 and chapter 43. Look how Ezekiel describes the purpose of his new temple in 40 to 48. All right, this is another chart here. The purpose of Ezekiel's temple vision. Look with your eyes. Set your heart on all that I will show you in order that. Why am I showing this to you? This is the very beginning of the temple vision. So that you may declare all that you see to the house of Israel and describe every last detail. Describe to the house of Israel the temple. Measure the plan. Make known to them the design, the arrangements, its exits, its entrance. That is the whole design. Make known to them as well, and let's consider why? Make known to them its statutes, its whole design, its laws. Why? So that they may observe all of its laws and its statutes and carry them out. Gosh, what do you make of that verse? Well, it seems like details matter to Ezekiel. And you know what? If they matter to him, they should matter to us as well. Whether you're crazy like me or you're far more normal and you think all of this is symbolic. We all can agree, however, that the good shepherd has laid down his life for the sheep so that the spiritually dead can be brought back to life and be given a new heart and a new spirit so that we can live with God forever in a space where there will be no more evil or crying or tears anymore.